A sitting sheriff was diagnosed with an acute psychological breakdown by his own doctor 24 hours before he walked into a courthouse and shot a judge 9 times. The doctor put it in writing. The people closest to him had already called the Bar Association. The system had every piece of information it needed to act, and it had no mechanism to do anything with it. 18 months later, Mickey Stines is waiting for a trial date, and today we're going inside the footage, we're going inside the timeline, the legal fight that nobody's explaining clearly. John, we have covered this on a previous episode. We're going to cover it again because it was just fresh information when we tried to explain it the first time.
Actually, the first time we tried to explain it, there was almost no information. The case came out that Sheriff Mickey Stines had shot Judge Kevin Mullins, and scant few details came out, and there was a lot of misinformation, like the judge had had contact with the sheriff's daughter, that this was all happening in the context of a sex scandal with one of the sheriff's deputies and some inmates, which turned out to be true. And because there was no information, and because the details that did exist were so salacious, the imagination filled in a lot of those details with scandalous information, a lot of which turned out not to be true. The judge, Kevin Mullins, was cast in a rather negative light, which he didn't deserve. And a lot of things have come to light since then that completely recontextualize this story to still be salacious, but entirely different than what we thought, Drew.
Yeah, so there are plenty of things that we can clear up, plenty of misconceptions. There's a big one right at the end that I think you need to stick around for.
Go ahead.
What do you got?
Shots fired at Llaya County Courthouse and somebody shot Judge Mullins.
You're a can.
No, sir. Just come out on the radio.
It's definitely not a phone call you want to receive, John, as a law enforcement official. It's even worse, though, I would assume, as an emergency call taker. We're going to play that call, but this is kind of the crux, the backbone, the spine of the show. A system that had no off switch, because this was the Letcher County, Kentucky sheriff. His name is Sean Mickey Stines, and he was the sitting sheriff when the judge was shot.
I got emergency at the courthouse. I need ambulance here right now at district courtroom.
Which courthouse?
Court, Letcher County.
And what's going on?
Judge has been shot.
The judge?
Yes.
What's his name?
Kevin Mullins.
So, John, Kevin Mullins was the judge that was the victim in this case. So we'll definitely pay our respects to him and his family. He's a Letcher County, Kentucky judge. The population of that county is about 22,000 people. He'd served 15 years on the bench, so he'd been a judge for quite a while, an attorney, longer, obviously, than that. You don't just automatically show up as a judge. His impact was in drug court. He had diverted over 15,000 people to drug treatments. He had a pretty important role in that county.
I think what's amazing about it is what came out as part of the tracing down what happened to Mickey Stines that day that would ultimately make him pull the trigger on his own friend, is that the judge and the sheriff were actually good friends. They had worked together for many years. Mickey Stines had done courtroom security before he ever even ran for sheriff. So these guys have been in a workspace together, not always necessarily after similar aims other than justice. Normally, a sheriff and a judge do not get along. The judge is normally pissed off that deputies are cutting corners or causing constitutional problems or complicating cases, or sheriff is, these guys, sometimes they can butt heads, but this was an unusual case in that they were very good friends. They were eating lunch not long before the final fatal encounter, Drew.
So that's a great point, because this is a guy who spent his career putting people behind bars. He was diagnosed by his own doctor as psychologically breaking down. He was going downhill. Like, the recency of his diagnosis and what his family members started to see, it was within 24 or 48 hours, give or take. He walked into that courthouse. He shot his friend, as you just identified him, 9 times. The doctor had already documented it. People around the sheriff in his orbit saw it coming, in a sense, maybe not this violent outbreak, but the system had no real mechanism to stop it. There's no mechanism in place in the state of Kentucky to take a gun away from a sitting sheriff. I think that was a problem that they identified.
When you're talking about somebody who gets appointed like a chief or something, there's somebody who's in charge of that person. A sheriff's an elected official. In Letcher County, it's a very, very small place. It's the kind of place that I understand because those are population statistics that I'm used to. And I think, how would we deal with a sheriff who was becoming agitated, unbalanced, making phone calls to people that were no longer alive, behaving irrationally, and he's the boss of the whole office. There's no legitimate way to remove him. Where I live, there's remedies for that. The state's attorney is actually the only person who has the power to arrest the sheriff. It doesn't normally end this way, Drew.
There's another reason this probably seems familiar to you, because this sits on the border of Virginia. It's on the far eastern edge of the state of Kentucky. Everyone in that courthouse kind of knew each other. A victim in this case, Judge Mullins, God rest his soul, sustained a 30-year friendship with the guy who ultimately took his life.
What's shocking is in this case is we actually have footage of this incident going down that we're going to replay for you. Footage that shouldn't have even existed, but only did because of the incident I mentioned earlier with the sex scandal with the deputy taking place inside Judge Kevin Mullins' chambers. Now, Sheriff Stines is putting forward a defense that's probably going to be largely predicated on his mental status.
This all stems from a big case that was going on. There was a guy named Deputy Ben Fields who was in charge of community control. Yeah, he was in charge of the ankle monitors, and he was indicted and convicted for exchanging sex for, time off on the sentence. And he was consummating these relationships right in the judge's chamber.
Eastern Kentucky Sheriff's deputy has received a sentence for several charges, including rape and sodomy. WYFT's Chandler Wilcox gives us the latest on that case.
Former Letcher County Sheriff's Deputy Ben Fields was indicted on several charges, including third-degree rape, sodomy, tampering, and perjury. Fields faced Pike County Circuit Judge Eddie Coleman via Zoom, with victim Sabrina Atkins in attendance. Coleman sentenced Fields to 7 years in prison. Victim Sabrina Atkins expressed a lot of emotion.
Judge Coleman, you see the impact this has had on me and my family. And how much this has taken time for me and my son.
That was Chandler Wilcox reporting. Judge Eddie Coleman also says Ben Fields is to report to the Letcher County Jail by Friday at noon.
Well, this is all kind of eerie because who runs the Letcher County Jail, John?
Well, the sheriff, it would be his boss. The sheriff's deputy has a lot of discretionary power over what happens to that person that's on the program. He violated that power. He used it for his own gratification. He violated the public trust. Perhaps worst of all, Drew, he gave the sheriff's office a black eye. He made his boss, Mickey Stines, look very bad, and also opened the door through that his terrible acts and his criminal conviction to huge lawsuits, which then Mickey Stines was going to be defending himself in his office for.
Yeah, that led to his demise, actually. So Fields, actually what he would do is remove the ankle monitors entirely. He would conduct his abuse or his operation or whatever, and he'd reinstall them before the court appearances so nothing looked wrong on paper. But there was a guy named Chris Triplett that tried to report this to the sheriff's office both by phone and in person. An employee literally laughed at him and refused to document it, which is a huge mistake. Another reason why this federal lawsuit took place. So it's not just a paperwork failure, that's a deliberate suppression of a civilian complaint. So when that civil lawsuit came, Sheriff Stines sat for a deposition. He admitted under oath that he had ignored mandatory training requirements for high-risk tasks. And those requirements, they were in the department's written policies, so it's even worse. Right. Yeah. He acknowledged that he and Fields and other employees exchanged crude sexual content in their text messages. It was like an internal group chat, but still unprofessional. And he described his own leadership as, in his words, horrible. His failure to supervise or, to maintain a proper office is his own doing. He even admitted it in the deposition.
Shades of Michael Proctor here for all you police officers and commanders out there that are out there sending text messages to each other like this. It's all discoverable.
Stop it.
But he does have some videotapes of some stuff in the judge's chambers.
What kind of stuff?
Just with girls, sexual and stuff.
What describe? Have you seen the videos?
I've seen one partly, and just them having sex with girls for their bail to get out of jail.
Who was having sex?
Ben and just some higher ups up there.
Who?
The judge and.
Now you saw the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What did you see on the video? I mean, you.
I mean, I've seen Judge Mullins having sex with a girl.
Who was the girl?
I don't know, because I don't know a lot of people from over there.
Where was it at?
In his office, in the judge's chambers.
Apparently, Mickey Stines did what Ben Fields did prior to becoming sheriff, and literally is accused by that woman of doing the same thing that Ben Fields did before becoming sheriff.
That would explain the acute stress reaction. If Mickey Stines, is literally eating himself with stress, losing 40 pounds, sleepless, I guess he's worried about the disgrace, the humiliation, the firing, the prospective prison time, and being branded a sex offender for the rest of his life. I could see where that would worry him. That's the sort of Damocles hanging over you there.
But we're building on something here. The shooting didn't start with a gun, so to speak. It started with that whole deputy sextortion ring and the deposition and the falling off of the sheriff's mental health. And he was driving around the courthouse for quite a while. He had lunch with his friend, the judge. It was like he was in this decision mode. Or was he in a state of paranoia? We're about to find out as we see what happened in the chamber. So this footage comes to us from the Courier Journal. The judge is having a little meeting in his chambers with some people. It's just after lunch. Everybody's casual. The judge is smoking a cig. And there comes a point where the sheriff just shuts the door and everyone's like, oh, okay. They just, I don't know what's said. There's no audio to this, but they all just kind of file out like,
he's dismissed them. He says, can you guys excuse me? I got to talk to Judge Mullins. I'm sure it was something like that.
Sure. And so he sits back at 2:42. He stood up, he opened the door in the hallway and he closed it again. But watch what he does here, John. He's just looking to see if anybody's on the other side of it. Like he's in a sense exhibiting the paranoid behaviors.
Judge, meanwhile, is just sitting back and relaxing. I think it's really important to look at the judge for cues as to what his perception of the situation is. I don't think he knows anything is coming the way he's leaning back there and smoking.
Yeah, this is kind of how the judge's room is laid out. There's that door that you saw him go into, the judge's chamber itself. There's also a jury room, which we're going to see the Sheriff Stines kind of walk back, or Mickey, we'll call him Mickey because he's a retired sheriff now. He's under indictment. He's in jail. But he goes back to this other room and kind of scopes it out. But he's just kind of displaying this paranoid behavior. And then he comes back and sits down and just some odd stuff going on. Let's take a look. At 2:45, he stood up again. He walked out of view. That was when he stood in that doorway of that other room. And it kind of looks like he shut the door to that, maybe locked it. And the judge is clearly, you could see he's dragging on a cigarette, but he's still engaged in conversation with Mickey at that point. So he walked to the other door, opened it. He closed it again, sat down. He's just like, there's somebody on the other side of this door is basically what it looks like.
Strange behavior, but both men appear very calm, very relaxed. You could see the crossing his legs, putting his hands over his heads there.
Yeah. And at no point is he showing that he has a gun on his hip. Like he is the sheriff. It's probably presumed that he does. And I mean, after all, it's Kentucky, but there's a point where the sheriff picks up his phone and starts looking through it. You can kind of make out what he's doing. He picks up he tried to call somebody. Then there's a point where you can see that he's even trying to use like FaceTime or something, or maybe it's the contact photo of his daughter, but that's presumably who he's trying to call. He's trying to call his daughter because he's feeling all of this paranoia that his wife and child are in danger. He has this like acute, feeling that they're in danger because of this federal deposition.
Now, is that his phone that he's using there?
That's his phone. You'll see that there's kind of a lively conversation going back and forth between him and the judge. The judge takes out another cigarette. He looks at him with that strange, like, huh? What are you talking about? And he lights a cigarette. And then, so he's like, you can tell at some point the judge is like, with his robe on, by the way, he's got to get his robe out of the way. He reaches into his pocket, is like, you want to check my phone? Here's my phone. Or I don't know if it was check my phone or can I borrow your phone? But at any rate, what he was looking for was a way to get a hold of his daughter. He was trying to get a hold of his daughter on his own phone. Then he tries to get a hold of his daughter on the judge's phone.
And that's
So-
where a lot of the rumor mill came out, is that the judge already had his daughter in the contacts, which turns out not to be true. I think what this kind of implies, Drew, is that he's trying to call his daughter from his phone and his daughter's not taking the call. And now he's trying to call her from a phone number she won't recognize on the chance that she'll answer.
Yeah, this is the point where he points over towards Mullins, and Mullins hands him the phone. So he tries to, he takes the phone. It was early, like very early on. It was reported that he just went through his contacts and found her number and called her, you know, in order to get her to answer. But that's not what happened at all. In fact, we'll clarify that at the end for sure. You'll hear it straight from the horse's mouth in a sense.
He seems to be dialing right now. I mean, there's not much doubt about it. You can see what he's doing on the phone. He was punching in numbers.
Yep. So there he sits with one
phone number from his own phone.
Yeah, one phone in his hand, using it to pull up the contact info. He's got the other phone in his ear, and the judge is just kind of sitting there like, I am sure at this point the judge is like, man, what is going on with this dude? He's not acting like himself. But listen, they pulled, this is the forensic truth of this case, that they pulled the Celebrate information from the cell phones, from her phone, from the judge's phone, from the daughter's phone, from the judge's phone, from Mickey's phone. There was no contact. There was no, like, he manually dialed his daughter's number from the judge's phone at 251, and that was the only contact there was between those two phones. So all of this speculation that kind of destroyed a family in a sense for a couple days, people were kind of clinging on, you know, in hopes that there was something salacious between the judge and the daughter.
More than a couple days. Once the rumor gets out, people won't even believe the rumor being contradicted. People will still suspect things long after that. I'm sure that there's still people who are raising eyebrows at this family as to what was going on.
Yeah, it's just sick the way, you know, people treat these victims and their families.
Llaya Stines, she has now spoken publicly on TikTok about this for the very first time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Llaya Stines. I am 18 years old, and I am from Letcher County, Kentucky. Most of you may know me, and the others may recognize my last name. On September 19th, a little over a year ago, a lot of people's lives changed forever, including mine. I'm not going to go into detail. I will not be talking about it. But I just have one question. Do you all not have anything better to do than to sit and gossip? You are taking my pain and making it your pleasure. You're taking our stories and turning them into big entertainment pieces, jokes, and for that matter, you're making it your income. Since when did that become okay? So my advice to the people doing that, get a job, do something meaningful with your life, and contribute to society in a positive way.
Imagine the nightmare, John, of having to, the last thing you see before you go to sleep is a bunch of people talking garbage about your family or you or her dad or even the victim in this case, who she's saying, look, you know, she didn't mention him by name, but like there's no illicit, like she didn't ask for this. Llaya Stines did not ask for this. Every good true crime story starts with a 911 call, and that's where we're coming from. We're operational true crime. We're not tabloid true crime, John. That's a new phrase I invented. What I've noticed about our interactions with people in these videos is that we get a lot of people to stay a long time because they're intrigued by the stories that we tell, but a big chunk of them, John, are not subscribers. They're non-subscribers.
If you like what you see, hit subscribe. Check out more videos from us.
So share with your friends and family if you want to see the real deal. I'm not going to show the full shooting. That's shown several times over on a million different channels. It'll be pixelated, but you'll get the idea. We'll watch here, but I want you to watch the clip after very carefully. He stood up reached for his handgun. He started walking around the desk, and you could see automatically the judge puts his hands up. He's like, whoa, what's going on here? And the judge tries to stand up to leave, and the sheriff walks over to the door again at some point and locks it, which is even more daunting.
Terrifying too.
Yeah. So here's where a lot of consternation comes in this case. The defense is making a case that the sheriff's mental health declined very rapidly, and that's what led to this. And the Kentucky State Police and everybody else who did this investigation, to include the prosecution, is somewhat saying, look, he may have been under a tremendous amount of stress and under some anxiety here, but he's not exhibiting complete loss of faculties, because he walked over, he locked the door, he had cleared everybody out of the room, he was having a normal conversation, he was relaxed, as you pointed out, John, with his hands on his head, not more than a minute or two prior. Even though, forensic command staff were alarmed enough to facilitate a medical intervention on September 18th, the physician evaluated Stines, documented an acute stress reaction. But again, nothing would come of that because there's no mechanism to do anything with it. So in this 24-second window in that room, this is where some very life-changing and life-ending decisions were made. He's still talking to the judge. I did cut some of this out, but you'll see the pixelated part, because there's a point where he just takes, he's already got the gun out of his holster. The judge looks like he's pleading with him. He's kind of talking to him, or trying to talk him down, or trying to talk some sense into him, like there's nothing happening here. And he just starts firing his gun. And the judge tried to take cover under the desk, and Stines went around the chairs to, in essence, finish the job. And that's another argument that the Kentucky State Police are making, that you can't on one hand say that he was crazy and out of control, and then on the other hand show that he still has these tactical maneuvers that a trained law enforcement officer would have, John.
Well, not only that, but he's checking the area, securing the perimeter, like you said, but also he doesn't tip his hand until it's time. The way that he leans back in his chair, puts his hand behind his head, rests his leg. He doesn't want to tip the judge off and give the judge any idea of what's coming, so the judge has a chance to get away. In fact, whatever it is this confrontation was about, Mickey Stines buried the lead until the last second, until that pistol was in his hand, and then still didn't let the judge go. So I guess you have to ask yourself, is there a basic level of functioning, the lizard brain, that he could be operating on, where he's trying to do something, but he doesn't understand the rightness or wrongness of his actions, but in every other sense, he has his faculties. The test of the law will be whether or not he knew it was right or wrong at the time when he did pull the trigger.
So he's calling, getting help. It's the same phone call that we heard earlier, we can assume. And not long after, Sheriff Stines turned himself in. He didn't resist. That's where he started exhibiting the paranoia. So we'll see in a second here, there's a body cam video of him in the hallway. There's a body cam video of him being transported. He's got these like childlike vocal shifts that you'll be able to pick up on. He's just got this intense paranoia going. He's worried about his family, just irrational demands. And he makes some of these statements on the way to the jail that we're about to see. But this is where it all turned, John.
I wasn't present, but when he was taken into custody, I was told by one of the other officers that were there that he made the comment, they're trying to kidnap my wife and kid.
Would you talk to us?
So that was at the preliminary hearing. That was the detective, Clayton Stamper, I think his name is. And he's saying that he was told, John, that that the first thing out of the sheriff's mouth when he turned himself in was that he was trying to protect his wife and daughter. What you'll see here, John, is the sheriff sitting in the hallway, and listen very carefully to what he says and how he's trying to protect himself here.
In the jail down there, do you feel safe down there because there's cameras everywhere? Are you going to move me after the interview?
Bosses have had.
I mean, I'm not trying to dictate how it goes, guys. I know how this works. I'm not going to feel safe in a room here, but
We're not going to hurt you, Mickey.
Listen,
Why would
just like Anthony, I've known you for 20 years, but we're not going to hurt you.
yeah.
That's why we have 2 body cams and a digital recorder running, Bub. I promise you.
I ain't got none.
I know that, but that ain't what we're worried about, Bub. We just can't talk in the hallway of the courthouse. Plus, there's people looking. We need to go somewhere out of here. And
Pull my pockets inside out.
It ain't that bad.
No, pull my pockets inside out. Now, guys, y'all don't do me this way. Y'all gonna leave me in here and let me die.
So what kind of what are you seeing him exhibit in those statements?
It's very, very strange. He's throwing off his shoes. He's trying to make sure that these guys understand that he's not carrying any contraband, any weapons. He's setting it up so like you guys don't have a pretense to use any force against me. There's nothing in my pockets that's going to pose any risk to you. And he's saying, don't do me like this. He thinks these people who are his friends, who are handling him not only with professionalism, but with personal kindness. I believe that he believes that he's in some kind of danger. The thing is, when you're dealing with people in a psychotic break, this is kind of where I rely on my training as a crisis negotiator and as someone who's spent many years inside prison around people who are having psychotic breaks, people who are perpetually in states of paranoia and psychosis, is that they're doing it right. They're treating his feelings as real, but you can't give a lot of credulity to the things that he's saying. So if you're watching this and you see Sheriff Mickey Stines saying, don't do me this way, you shouldn't take it as any kind of credible statement that sheriff's deputies or law enforcement officers in Kentucky are going to be doing anything out of pocket, when it comes to dealing with suspects. He's not saying I expect the same kind of treatment that we normally give to people here in Kentucky. He's acting very strangely, and I believe that this is a real psychotic break. But Drew, the question will be, is he setting up some sort of defense later? He knows that he's gone and done this terrible thing. Does he have the presence of mind to be displaying these kinds of behaviors in order to set up a mental health, not guilty by mental disease or defect defense later? I would say no. I would say that as a law enforcement officer, if he knows anything about the law, the best thing he can do is use his right to remain silent and let his defense construct that story later when he goes to trial. But the way that he's behaving, I absolutely believe, especially in the context of him killing his friend and a judge, an objectively terrible thing to do, I believe that he is out of it.
It's kind of rare to have somebody be completely cooperative yet misleading you constantly when they're a law enforcement officer. In that sense, he would probably be more apt to say, like, I'm just not going to say anything to you guys. I just want to make sure my wife and daughter were okay. Or he could leave it at, my wife and daughter were under threat, and that's all I'm going to say. But that's not what's happening. You're right. What is happening is he's making these claims that they're trying to kill him. He's worried about whether or not the cameras are rolling constantly because he wants everything recorded. He even made at one point, before he got into the car, he made a demand that they open the trunk so that he could see that nobody was in the trunk that was going to get him.
Nobody was in there, or, not a shovel in a bag of lye.
Yeah, right. Right.
You may pick your leg up, my brother.
Y'all got carbon monoxide in here.
So he's even kind of accusing them of carbon monoxide poisoning him. He's so, I don't know how to put it. Deposition, and then the lack of sleep, and then the fall off the cliff from a mental health standpoint, that he believes everybody is out to get his family and everybody is out to get him. He's lost it. And I agree with you, John. I think this kind of lends to his.
It doesn't mean that he's not guilty. He might have known at the time that what he was doing was wrong, but I believe he is in the middle of some kind of break. But because he's delaying the process, he's saying that this is another way in which they intend to snuff him out, it's just a really bizarre thing to say. I've never even had inmates say this to me before when I've transported inmates, that they thought that was going to happen.
Come on now. Come on. I can't sit like this. I can't.
He still believes he's being led to his execution. He's in custody, which means all the Miranda rules apply.
I think the problem with Miranda is if you're actually going to go that route where you want to collect the things that he's saying and use it against him, is that a defense attorney is going to say, look at this guy. He's completely out of it. He doesn't understand Miranda rights when you read it to him. I think it's much better if you just say, like, Mickey, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Are you all right? And then just let him talk. And whatever he says is going on the record. And, maybe he's in acute psychosis and maybe he isn't, but at least he'll paint you a picture of whatever it is that he's thinking if you just let him talk.
If he's exhibiting these signs of being led to his execution, maybe this isn't the right time. Like, you should probably get him to a safe space and let him regulate a little bit, just in a controlled environment. And then you can start, once you sit across from him, read the body language, start asking him the questions, asking him about what happened instead. That's not what happened here, though, because even on the ride to the jail, as you're about to hear, he was still in that paranoid state of mind. So either he was just like continuing the grift, which I don't think he was, or he was still in mental decline.
Yeah, but confessions are thrown out if they're under some kind of duress, and I think Mickey Stines is telegraphing duress pretty well, whether it's real or not. So it would complicate any kind of confession.
This is not the jail. This is not the jail now. This is not the jail.
So this is the timeline of how things happen. This, September 12th is when Judge Mullins, remember, he was a drug court judge. He went to some type of like conference or class with the sitting judge in this case. So they attended this thing together, which is why right now they're trying to get him to recuse himself from this case. So far it's been denied. It's still up in the air though. But September 12th was when that took place. And then the 16th was when the sheriff had his deposition, and obviously the tremendous amount of stress that took place after he said what he said in his deposition. He probably thought better of what he said. Then the 18th is when the medical diagnosis came, John. Less than 24 hours later, boom, we have the shooting.
What was the point of doing the medical intervention and trying to get the diagnosis other than hanging a hat of liability on everyone who knew the outcome of it? It's like, why go looking for what you don't want to find? You got this medical diagnosis that he was in acute psychological stress. You have no mechanism to act on it. So now what? Now it's just everyone knows that Sheriff Mickey Stines is out of control mentally, and whatever happens, happens.
Right. So the transport footage went into the defense file. As of now, the reason there's no trial date has nothing to do with the evidence. It's just got more to do with that lingering question that we just talked about, whether defense can get the judge removed before this thing even starts.
How complicated is the answer to that question? Why?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, and I certainly hate to disappoint the viewers, but I don't think that we're going to get that full answer tonight, Vinny. It's extremely complicated. Look, this is not a simple case. This is not a case that is only told by the, 7 to 10 seconds that was shown at the preliminary hearing. The story is one that's told over a several-year period, and most especially and specifically, it is told over the weeks prior to that ultimate moment that you see there in the video.
So when you talk about the danger, and this, I want to clarify this, is this actual danger that his wife and daughter were in, or was it perceived danger in the mind of the sheriff, which may be suffering from some delusional thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, I think there are three options here. Because without a doubt, enough witnesses had interacted with him and heard him convey the fact that he was afraid that others were going to cause him or his family harm. So you basically have three options. One, there was no objective threat, and this is all a complete fabrication within his own mind, that it's completely subjective. The threat is completely within his own mind. And then the second possibility is that there was someone around the corner and he was only perceiving an actual and objective threat. So under the first scenario, then I think we are certainly being prudent in exploring his mental health. And under the second scenario, then there certainly is another element of the case. But I think there's a third option. And according to our investigation and what we've seen, I expect it will be that the truth is a combination of both. I believe there was an objective threat to his family, but I believe that his mental health was impaired to a degree that it impacted his ability to perceive immediacy and, the imminent threat of that, the imminent nature of that threat, Vinny, as well as the magnitude.
So these are the markers of the collapse: that 40-pound weight loss, the severe insomnia, the delusions that other people saw. The indictment dismissal motion was denied. They moved to dismiss the entire thing based on those mental health factors. The judge ruled that the surveillance video provides independent probable cause, regardless of what the detective omitted about the mental health diagnosis, because there's a tricky little thing in adding a mental health diagnosis in a police report. So that battle is over. They're not going to just summarily, dismiss this whole thing. The death penalty motion, though, that's something the defense filed in February of 2026, and they requested a hearing to determine whether his serious mental illness would preclude the death penalty. That hearing can't even happen yet because the judge recusal fight is still active. There's still a judge recusal issue out in the orbit. The defense filed a renewed affidavit right just a couple weeks ago, April 1st, 2026, a couple days ago, actually. And they were seeking a new special judge after Coron is the name of the sitting judge. He denied the recusal motion in March, and that renewed the filing. And that's been escalated towards the Kentucky Supreme Court. They're really concerned about this judge sitting on this case. And until that's resolved, the mental health issues and the exclusions and all that other stuff, all those hearings, it's all frozen, John. There's no trial as of today.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these issues, competency hearings, talking about whether or not he's going to face the death penalty for this, it all comes down to whether he had reasonable malice of forethought. And I think a lot of these things, if he can get past those initial barriers, I think those things are probably best decided by a jury. You're going to have a battle of experts if this does go to trial, and they're going to try to ascertain his mental status and potentially whatever was motivating Mickey Stines that day, real or imagined. We're going to hear about it, and it'll be very exciting to hear about, just because this is a tremendous case, a shocking case, a really tragic case. I believe that Kevin Mullins, the judge, I think that his name's been besmirched. I think we deserve to know the truth about what was going on with him to clear his name. And we also need to just get to the bottom of what happened to Sheriff Mickey Stines. And in a broader context, we need to have a conversation about mental health for command staff. We talk so much about the beat cop police officers who have to be the first on the scene with crime scenes and take all the emergency intervention stuff. But these guys at the top who often are suffering in silence, these guys can be dealing with acute mental problems as well. There's no one to relieve them when it's obvious that they can't do their job anymore. And it's a question going forward for people in Kentucky for sure, but it's something that a lot of places can learn from.
Let's get into where we're going from here, since there's no trial date at this point. And now the jury has got a weighty decision to make. The prosecution has a 24-second video, John, that shows 9 shots from 3 tactical firing positions. So it juxtaposes whether he was in mental decline or whether he was still tactically sound. He had cleared the room, he checked doors, he locked in a kill zone even. And the defense has a physician's diagnosis from the day before. And there was 40 pounds of weight loss. You could see that. There were calls to dead relatives that people have reported, documented active psychosis in the jail 4 days later. And 2 hours of transport audio that sounds like a guy that's he genuinely believes that he's being driven to his execution, and he has no idea how, but he just knows that it's coming. So this case is going to go to a jury. When it does, those 2 reels of footage are going to be played back to back, and 12 people are going to have to decide which one represents the real Mickey Stines. And rest assured, Llaya and her family didn't ask for this, but we will be watching. John?
I have to commend Llaya. You know, she didn't have to do those things. Obviously, she felt compelled to do those things, to speak out about what was going on. I thought she comported herself well. She didn't weigh in on the guilt or innocence of what was happening. She was just calling out people for their bad behavior and the effects that it does have on the people who are certainly innocent in this case, which are the families and the friends of Mickey Stines and Judge Mullins. There are huge stakes here with this video. There's not really any doubt whether or not he committed this egregious act of violence. It's whether or not he's justified by some sort of background story that we can't understand, which would then also be in conflict with the paranoia. It seems like the paranoia also unravels any story that he would have about acute harm coming to his family. But I think when the rubber meets the road, the future for Sheriff Mickey Stines, the ex-sheriff, is that a guy that's not going back out into the community. He's either looking at life in prison or a death sentence, which he's probably too old to ever actually meet, or he'll have some sort of confinement to a mental health facility. So the road before him is fairly clear. We just got to suss out the details and figure out why he would do this terrible thing to a judge that did so much, I think, to help his community and to change things positively in his community. And there we eventually will see what happened and what Mickey Stines believed at that moment he pulled the trigger.
John, another great episode.
Yep. 10,000 episodes. By the way, that's not just a goal. It is a mandate by the court. We will stop when we reach episode 10,000.
Maybe.